Добрый день.
Recording in progress.
Мы начинаем наш ивент, который
Hello
проходит
everyone, we start our event that is going on in two formats, online and offline. I'm happy to welcome all of you, those who are present here and who have connected to us. My name is Olga Tomaszewska. I'm the PR manager of BEROC. We launch our traditional presentation of materials of Belarusian Economy Monitor, and as usually, we will introduce the issues on SMEs and households, and then we will have an overview of the economics, and we will have one more dimension, which is inflation, humanitarian dimension, and in the end, we'll be able to ask questions. Please write your text, the questions in the chat of Zoom as well, and you can write in the chat of YouTube. All the questions will be escalated to the presenters. The questions asked at the registration, and I think that our presenters have considered them. And we start with Violetta Panasevich, who will introduce the household survey. Hello, I'm going to dwell at the attitudes and expectations of households in Belarus. We will also be speaking about growing consumer lending and growing demand for services. So let's start as usual. Let's start with the monitoring baseline. We make a survey. This is the monitoring based on an online survey we had in late June 2023. We asked urban citizens, adults, and we also complied this to the general sampling of Belarus in terms of
Начнем со снижения доходов.
gender,
Об
age,
этом заявила в этой волне опроса 32,6% респондентов. И
and
это минимальная
region.
доля респондентов за все волны
We
опроса.
can see the share
Чаще
of
всего
respondents,
по классике доход уменьшался за
32.6,
счет
which is the
роста
minimum
цен и изменения курса
in all the
рубля.
time of surveys. We
Если
have
мы
always followed
очистим от
the
этих параметров, то
changes
останется
in the
30 и 22% соответственно
forex
респондентов, которые
fluctuations of the
сообщают о
Belarusian
снижении
ruble. But
доходов.
if we
И
exclude
среди
that,
них
then we
чаще
can
всего
say
об
that
этом
40% of the
заявляют
population say that their
самозанятые,
incomes
предприниматели
declined,
и люди,
especially
заняты в этой
entrepreneurs,
сфере.
self-employed, and people working in
Далее,
the
если
IT
мы
sector.
спросим у этой трети
Then, if
респондентов
we ask this
как
one-third of
они
the
справляются
respondents
с падением
how they
доходов,
cope
то
with
мы не увидим
fallen
сильной динамики за
incomes,
последнюю
then we
волну
will not
опроса.
see significant
Наиболее
dynamic
сильно
change
изменилось
throughout
отношение
the
к
latest
крупным
waves of the
покупкам.
survey.
Их стали
People
откладывать
change
чаще на
their attitudes
7%
to
по
large
сравнению с предыдущим
purchases. They
кварталом.
delay them by 7% more often than in the
Далее
previous
перейдем к
quarter.
рынку труда. Тут тоже
Then
особых
let's go
потрясений, как
into the
обычно, не
labor market.
происходит.
We do not
Сокращается
usually
количество
see
людей,
any
которые потеряли
significant
работу.
changes there. We can
В
see a
этой
growing
волне
number
их
of people who lost their
33%.
jobs. We
А
can see
также появилась тенденция к
30.3%, and then also we
сокращению
can see the growing
доли тех
trend
респондентов, которые
for
отмечают, что кто-то из
the
их знакомых
respondents
потерял
who
работу.
say that
Сейчас это
usually one of their
17,9%.
friends lost a
Посмотрим,
job.
сохранится ли эта тенденция
So we can
следующего
see
опроса.
whether this trend continues in the
Далее мы
follow-up waves of
строим
the survey.
индекс потребительской
Then we
уверенности. Он
make
состоит из 5 либо 4
the
компонентов в зависимости от методологии.
then we
Первые
can see
два,
how
они
it
про
changes according
экономическую
to the
ситуацию в стране.
methodology. First
По
two about the
классике
economic
белорусы
situation in the
оценивают
country.
экономическую ситуацию
Traditionally,
хуже по
Belarusians
сравнению
evaluate
с
economic
материальным положением
situation
семьи.
worse than the material standing of
Однако
the family.
сейчас это, наверное, самое
However,
лучшее
right now,
отношение к экономической ситуации
this
за все волны опроса. У нас немного повысилась
was
неопределенность,
because
доля
of that,
неопределенности, особенно
because
относительно
we can
текущего
see a growing
положения по
number of
сравнению с годом назад.
uncertainties if
Однако мы
compared to the
замечаем
previous year.
значительный
But right
прирост,
now, we can see a
уменьшение
significant
процента людей, которые сообщают
decrease
о
of the
том, что
percentage of
экономическое
people who
положение
report
стало
that the
хуже.
economic standing has
Далее
worsened.
перейдем к материальному положению семьи.
Let's go
Тут
to
мы
the
тоже видим
family
позитивную
financial
динамику.
standing. Here we can see the positive
Увеличился процент людей,
dynamics too.
для
We can
которых
see a
материальное
growing
положение
percentage
семьи не
of people
изменилось, появилась
who
некоторая
can see
стабильность.
that their family
И что
standing,
касается
financial
крупных
standing has not
покупок, тут
changed.
не
They
очень
are
понятно,
facing
если мы
some
смотрим
stability.
по
Speaking
сравнению
of
с предыдущей
purchases, if
волной,
we
но если
compare
мы
it to the
посмотрим на
previous
август
wave of the
22,
survey,
то есть что было
this
год
is one
назад,
story. But if we
заметна
look
сильная
at August
динамика как по
2022,
сокращению
we can see a
уровня
significant
неопределенности,
decrease
так по
in
увеличению
the
позитивных
level
ответов
of
и
uncertainty, and
увеличению
we can see
количества
a
ответов,
growing share
что
of
плюсов
positive
и
answers.
минусов для
People
того,
are
чтобы
more
приобретать
positive
крупные покупки, сейчас одинаково.
because we
На
can
основе
see
этих
the
5
equal number
компонентов
of minuses
строится
and
индекс
pluses,
потребительской
advantages and
уверенности, но
disadvantages of making
предварительно
large
мы на
purchases.
протяжении
We build a consumer
всех
confidence
волн упоминали
index
такой момент,
on
что
the
материальное
material
положение
standing
семьи
of
всегда
families,
оценивается
but we
лучше,
keep
чем финансовое
reminding
состояние экономики в
that
целом.
the
А
economic
сейчас мы
situation
наблюдаем сокращение
has
разрыва
been
между этими двумя показателями.
charged
Если мы спросим у
worse than the
респондентов
financial standing of families. And
про
today we can
материальное
see that
положение семьи и
this
состояние
gap
экономики,
is
которое они
being
оценивают как
bridged
скорее плохое в
when we
настоящее время,
ask people how
этот
they
разрыв волной
evaluate
за волной
the
постепенно
economic standing.
сокращается.
Today we
И
can
не за
see
счет
that
материального
every
положения, а за
wave
счет состояния
shows that
экономики.
this gap decreases
Сейчас
not because of the
состояние
family
оценивают
standing improving,
плохим только
but because of
3-4%
the economic
респондентов.
situation, and
Но этот
only
вопрос не идет
34%
в
of
сводный
respondents
индекс.
believe that this is
Что
worse
говорится
than the family financial standing. But what we can say about the consumer
полномерно и
confidence index
верно
in Belarus and Russia,
движется,
we can see that
восстанавливается из
Belarus has
зоны
been
начатой
recovering
с начала войны.
from
Сейчас этот индекс
the
составляет минус 10%,
from
и
the
он
figures
вырос на
of
4,5
the
процентных
beginning of the
пункта. Это
war.
в 2 раза
Today
больше,
it
чем в
is
России. И да, мы видим, что в
it is an
России
increase
были
by
колебания этого индекса, в
6.4
Беларуси достаточно верно и
pp.
прямо идет.
This is better than in Russia, where it is
Далее мы
2.9
строим
pp.
индекс
And we can see
потребительской
that this
уверенности, чтобы
growth has
сравнить
been
его
growing.
со
Then we
странами
build the consumer
Евросоюза.
confidence index in order to
Тут
benchmark with
Беларусь
the European
также
countries.
улучшила свой индекс и составил он минус 8,2%. В целом за эту волну в Евросоюзе ничего однозначного не происходило относительно индекса. Многие страны как сильно улучшили свой индекс, так и сильно его ухудшили. Например, Литва, которая в прошлый раз чуть ли не подобралась к позитивной зоне индекса, сейчас наоборот откатилась на минус 2,5%. А Черногория, которая была в негативной зоне, внезапно стала лидером среди
Was
стран
negative.
Евросоюза.
Today it is
И в
one of the
целом
leaders or the leader in the
индекс по
European
ЕС
Union. And
составляет
in general, the EU index is minus 15%, which is worse than the Belarusian index. Next, let's dive into the additional questions. Every survey monitoring, we highlight the topics that seem critical. This time we decided to investigate consumer behavior because we noticed that in the last half year, the growth of demand for services was much higher than the demand for goods, which was awkward. And we decided to ask a straight question whether you have started spending less or more or the same as before. And about 41% of respondents said that they started spending more. This is both in goods and services. If we speak about services, then they usually buy internet, communications, transportation, medical services, food services, and cosmetic services. We can see that we had an online survey and only 80% purchased communications and internet, etc. Households are usually not only one person, somebody can pay for the other. And this option was last chosen by the university students and women on maternity leave because other people pay for their bills. And also we can see that the services of travel agencies, we can see that according to the Academy of Science Service, only 30% of Belarusians prefer travel agencies. 70% prefer designing their travel routes themselves. Initially, this is not a very popular service for Belarusians, but as the so-called sanatoriums or spa resorts are concerned, they are overwhelmed. They have occupancy rate of over 95%. The growth has been growing. However, Belarusians are not using them. There is a suspicion that all of those are foreign tourists that improve this domain of the Belarusian economy. It is also interesting to look at travels and journeys. We can see that in summer, only 20% of Belarusians went on a trip, and 1/3 planned to do so in June. So we decided where they traveled and where they planned to travel. Out of this third, half of them want to travel across Belarus. Usually these are young people with a low income. Also, a third of this third plan to go to Russia. If we look at those people, these are usually 44 to 54 years old, residing in population in cities with a population of less than 30,000 people, also from Gobel and Mogilov regions, because they are adjacent to Russia. Out of the European countries, the leader is Poland. 8.5% of respondents plan to go there, and Turkey and Egypt are there. United Arab Emirates plan to be traveled by 2% of respondents. Then we decided to find out about consumer spending growth, because apart from this, we can see that the lending of SMEs has improved in addition to household lending programs. We can see that the interest rate has been going down. It used to be 11.5, today it is 10.5. This key interest rate enabled to issue consumer loans of worth of plus 4.9 billion Belarusian rubles. In the first half year, the arrears on NPLs have increased. It is 15.2%. Last year, it was minus 8.7%. Why households believe that consumer lending grows? 44% believe that it is easier to get a loan, which means the terms and conditions get loose. 25% believe that the interest rates on loans are low. However, we should make a disclaimer. These are interest rates per year, and possibly people recall what was the figure a year ago. It was 14%. That is for we have this figure, and usually youngsters borrow less, so they report this, and 15% believe that now is a good time for big purchases. This is based on our consumer confidence index, and however, we can see a small increase by 4% if compared to last year. And recently, the consumer attitudes index, according to the National Bank, is up to 40%. Probably we do not see this because our samples can be different, or responding was treated differently. Then we decided to ask about the attitudes towards loans, and here we can see the top two positions. They're concerns about lending. First, because people repay too much when they repay their loans, and second, they can accumulate loans and they can be overburdened. Next, quite positive things. People believe that that lending is what enables them to buy the thing that they can afford today. That's the key reason why people plan to apply for loans, and they get loans. And also, they believe that it's a good, so 56% pay off their loans, 37% applied for a loan, and 22% plan to get a loan. And we can see that the loan is a good way to buy what they cannot afford today. This is 68% also to borrow and to create a good credit history. 60% of respondents said that, and the loans enable to save thanks to inflation. These are 37%. Today, almost half of respondents repay loans. 37% of all respondents have got their loans or installment payments in the first half of 2023, and 22% plan to get a loan in the next 2 months. So this demand for loans is as before. Conclusion: the consumer confidence index and its components continue to recover. We can see this observed since December 2022. The share of respondents reporting a decrease in income is the lowest for all monitoring waves. These are 32.6%. 41% of households began to spend more, but not save. And the key reasons for getting loans are the lack of funds to purchase the necessary product, services, and desire not to spend a lot of money immediately upon purchase. Over. Violetta, thank you so much. And right now we're going to have our next presentation. Lev Lvovskiy is going to be over Zoom with us to tell us what are the outcomes of our surveys, of our survey of the enterprise versus the last time. Yes, hello everyone. You please stop sharing your previous presentation for me to be able to share my presentation. Good. I am going to tell you about the attitudes and expectations and sentiment of firms. Traditionally, this is the most positive sample of our respondents. We would like to remind you that we survey 300 SMEs. We break them into 4 sectors. Well, in fact, 3 sectors and all others, like manufacturing, construction, wholesale and retail, and others. Our respondents are owners and top managers of companies. We have an online survey and we make an index in order for this to be compared to the international methodology. Therefore, we generate an index. If if something is more than 50%, it is positive. If less than 50, then we can see a decline. So over 50, it's growth. If it is around 50, then we are in some neutral position. So we can say that the entrepreneurs showed a very good sentiment during the previous wave of the survey, because entrepreneurs could see that they survived through the year after the war started, after the unprecedented sanctions were introduced, and the worst expectations did not happen. So it was a record-breaking positive sentiment. Today we are almost in the same area. We can see that this positive attitude is declining a bit, but still the composite index indicates that entrepreneurs believe that the present time is quite positive, and in the future they expect some growth. If we break this into sectors, then we can see that the industry shows the best perception of the present and the future. This is not surprising. This complies with the objective macroeconomic statistics, where right now we can see a significant portion of growth be due to the recovery of industry and adaptation of industry to sanctions. In the construction sector, everything seems quite well. The construction sector, after dropping in 2022, recovers, breaks even, but if compared to last year, this is a positive dimension, and the entrepreneurs treat it the same way. In trade sector, we can see a some improvement in terms of the present and the future. According to macro data, we should see some more positive attitudes, but we believe that those entrepreneurs in the field or SMEs believe that the situation is relatively positive, modestly positive. And in the sectors, we can see that the current attitude is positive, and the future attitude is neutral. Speaking of the current economic and financial situation of companies, we can see that the positive attitudes have been accumulating. In terms of the economics, then we can see the record-breaking figures from the moment when we started our service from March 2021. The financial standing also behaves well. If we benchmark this with the macroeconomic statistics, then as the financial standing is concerned, if there are problems, then these challenges are faced by state-owned enterprises who have large stockpiles. But if we speak about private companies and about SMEs, then nobody is playing or nobody can afford playing with accounts receivable, and the situation keeps improving. Expectations of the future are also positive, maybe not as positive as in the previous quarter, but we are still in the growth area. Production and sales here, right now, we are in a neutral zone. However, entrepreneurs believe that the future will bring them growth and some positive trends. Employment, traditionally, well, we should not show this graph, but just in case, Belarus is a country where employment never changes. So we do not have any unemployment. We will see in the following slides. We are entering the labor market overheat, and one of the issues is the shortage of staff. What else starts growing? We can see that in late 2022, inflation expectations dropped, and now they improve. In 2022, in December 22, together with the recession, it was expected that the prices would not grow. And right now, due to all the impulses by the government in considering fiscal and monetary policies, we can see that the expectations of prices to grow also grow. Access to finance. Again, everything matches with the words said by the chairperson of the National Bank and the objective macro statistics. Basically speaking, right now we can see super loose monetary policy, and entrepreneurs start feeling it themselves. We can see that in the follow-up surveys, the index of access to finance keeps improving, and right now, well, if we look at those who find that this is very difficult or rather difficult, or it depends, or it's sooner, it is rather easy to get loans, we can see that it is this situation shows that this is easy to get access to finance. Speaking of the risks, average assessment of the current risk for doing business in Belarus, the index is 3.32. And we can see that we're getting to the equilibrium level of 3. So entrepreneurs believe that this is less and less risky. As you can see, the scale is from 1 to 5, where 1 is very low and 5 is very high, and median is 3, and the risk is higher than median. And traditionally, we ask what barriers entrepreneurs face. And as said, the first line, or the leader here, is the challenge of staff, lacking personnel. Entrepreneurs say that this is the largest challenge, and the rest of challenges are associated, like the next 2 to 3 are associated with sanctions. Challenge the supplies, financial issues. In fact, we can see that there are many issues associated with sanctions, and they can be broken down into various categories, like low external demand, and this can be a part of the challenge of payments and wire transfers. And in the last but one survey, the largest challenge was about sanctions. The previous survey showed that the largest challenge was the very state interfering with businesses. And today, top 1 is a lack of personnel. This may partially explain this record-breaking growth in salaries, despite the fact that the economy has not recovered from the war shock. Wages have already broken all historical highs. If we look at the barriers in sectors, what businesses complain about, here we can see sectors where The most popular answer is nothing is a barrier. We have no barriers in industry, in the manufacturing. We can see the most positive attitudes. Then they speak about challenges about personnel, finance in the construction sector, which largely depends on the financial system. Here we can see two popular barriers called by entrepreneurs. This is the macroeconomic instability and financial challenges, which means that these are the changes in the foreign exchange rate. These are the changes in the lending cost and other changes of regulations and rules and terms and conditions. But the most popular answer is we have no barriers. Speaking of the trade sector, they do not have issues with the personnel. By the way, one of the important issues here is still price controls. Entrepreneurs were not able to find any bypasses to adjust to it. There is certainly high competition, which is clear, and difficulties with supplies chains. So this is the impact of sanctions or toxicity of Belarus. Speaking of the services sector, we can say that the main barrier is price controls. Here we can see that top one is lack of staffs. Top two is challenged supplies because of supply chain disruptions or sanctions. Uh, in the summary of this index, we can see that entrepreneurs are positive, expecting growth, and they believe that the risks for doing business have not aggravated. I'd like to show you the last slide. So despite all this positive attitude, we also ask entrepreneurs what could help them. Maybe they don't need anything. Maybe they want something to be done in order for the challenges they face to evaporate, and we can see that all the answers are like from the pages of the oppositional newspapers. What entrepreneurs want, that's the key thing, is to stop what is going on, to get back to 2019, to establish international relations for them to be able to buy and sell and pay for goods, stable legislation in order for the laws not to be amended once a month, once a quarter, abolition of price controls by the government, opening of the western borders, which means the set up of supply chains. And quite surprising, at least for me, is that they speak about the decrease of interest rates on loans. This is among top 5 factors. However, our interest rates, the real interest rates, are relatively low. If we look at inflation rates, and again, we can see the rest of the things which are the consequences of we have been facing after 2020 and after 2022. Challenge the payments, supply chains, and the outflow of a labor force from Belarus, and almost 15% directly say as a desired action to stop military activities in Ukraine. So this is it from my side. I'll be happy to answer your questions, if any, but maybe after we complete all the presentations. Thank you for your attention. Lev, thank you so much. I'd like to remind you that we can write your questions in the chat and Zoom, in the YouTube chat, and while we are having 2 more presentations, we will definitely collect your questions and answer them at the end. And right now we're going to have a presentation by Dzmitry Kruk on the macroeconomic situation in the country. Thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. Indeed, Anatoly and I present a blog based on the statistics. Colleagues Violetta and Lev introduced the survey outcomes, and I usually make a disclaimer that we should separate the part based on the surveys and the part based on statistics. In the first case, we speak about the perception of some stakeholders, and here we are speaking about the facts and forecasts, and we can have different timelines. The surveys reflect the fresher trends rather than those that we have been registered and documented in statistics. Let me start with a big picture, the main trends, the key trends, and then we're going to illustrate all of the highlighted key trends. If we start with diagnostics without needless explanations, what we can see in Q1 being focused on Q2, we can see an accelerated and rather fast, if compared to what we could expect, a recovery of output and incomes. From the viewpoint of the consequences and assessment of quality in our Belarusian context, it's always important to divide why GDP grew. What was the key driver, either domestic demand or net external demand? Speaking of the current statistics, these are estimates for Q2. This is important. Statistics show that the undisputable leader in the first half year and in quarters was the domestic demand, and the domestic demand has investment as not consumption, the final consumption that used to be the main driver in late 2022. In 2023, the roles swapped, and mostly domestic demand is driven by investment. Speaking of the key trends in net external demand, exports continue recovering. However, in the beginning of this year, end of last year, it was quite a rapid recovery. Right now, we can see that this recovery has slowed down significantly. We can see it is positive, but going to zero. Therefore, I make a preliminary conclusion that the stage of adjustment to a new context, an attempt to find a new normality, is coming to the end, and the exports come to the ceiling in the new context. And I will dwell more on this later. Another very important trend that we can record based on the performance of the first half year and the second quarter, this is the accelerated physical volume of exports for the last few years. After starting from the COVID era, when we invented the term the external economic miracle. There was a gap between exports and imports. For the last 3 years, we could see that we could say that it was quite strange if compared to what we had for the last 20 years. During the pandemic, it would go down, then it would start slow recovery, and for the last half year, I repeat, if we judge about any economic characteristics, and we believe that normality is characterized by the previous years, we can see that it seems to be a recovery. So this is the fact. The import recovery was quite rapid, and the import caught up with exports in terms of the physical volumes. But what is standing behind the curtain? Why do we have these trends? What is critical? What is behind the scenes playing the role here? First, this is rapid salary growth. and this was faster than the output growth, and it was faster than the growth of other economic activities. Lev Lvovskiy has already mentioned it. In this trend, the structural changes happening in the labor market affect this, the contracting demand. Also, this is because migration, demography, the set of reasons why the labor market shrinks. Right now, I'm afraid to say that migration is top one. The second very important trend, and this is to follow up with the expanding dynamics of import and exports, we can see this is deteriorating external position in Q3 and 4 of last year. This recovery happened amid improving external position. And back then, we could register the situation which was called a super price competitiveness. Belarus was at the historic highs of its price competitiveness. Right now, this effect, well, I cannot say that has annihilated, but it's much weaker. The ratios between imports and exports deteriorated, and considering the real exchange rate, we can say that the price competitiveness, if compared to the previous half year, has significantly weakened, and we can see the recovery of demand for imports, and the lowest two trends will be discussed by my colleague, and this impacted the second half year and the second quarter. This is revitalization and intensification of lending and keeping inflation low. The key unknowns and what is going to predetermine the future context. So how this will translate into the dynamics of the following 2 or 3 quarters, it will depend, in my opinion, on the answers to the key 4 questions you can see on the screen. I will get back to these questions at the very end. I would like to highlight them now, and I'm going to scroll down through this, and depending on the answers to these questions, we will see one or the other trajectory of the dynamics of the main macroeconomic indicators. What we register today, the quality changes in the economy, are threatening, and there is a high probability that the inflation pressure will get back on the scene in the coming months. In early autumn, we will feel this, and we can say that a significant deterioration in external position. We can see that the trade balance is worse, and there is additional pressure on the exchange rate. And right now, this calls the demand to revise priorities for the economic policy. Until recently, and especially until now, the economic policy has been following the logic. Growth is primary. The second, all other things are secondary. So accelerating GDP is a key, and the rest of the things will be thought of tomorrow. If one or another review of priorities will happen or will not happen, then these burdens will translate into more tangible ones. There will be growing financial destabilization. There will be outbreaks of this kind, and there will be cool down in growth and transition to stagnation or even recession. We'll see how the economic authorities respond to that, and probably within the next few months, the monetary policy will be a key. Okay, what I listed, I will illustrate as the elements of this big picture. First, this is what we document according to statistics. we can see a rapid recovery growth of GDP. Below is the pace of GDP growth quarter on quarter, seasonally adjusted. I traditionally provide a little disclaimer. I'm using a metaphor. It's like in a car. When you switch on your onboard computer, sometimes it shows you an instant speed that you're driving at the moment. This is blue. Yellow is the average speed. In our case, this is the average speed per year, and the red line is the average speed for 5 years. If we focus on the last 2 quarters, we can see what I have already outlined as one of the key ideas, significant growth, pace of growth of GDP. If we elevate and look from the bird's view, what happens? This is the part of the journey that we had. So we cannot say that we have fully recovered, and the recession started in Q2 of 2021. We cannot say that we have exhausted it. We are not back to the level of the previous local maximum that we had in Q2 of 2021. However, a significant part of what we had in the second quarter of 2022 is over, and today the GDP level is close to the level of Q1 of 2022 and a bit higher than the pre-war rate, first quarter of 2022, because it was January, February, so we can say that it was the last pre-war point. However, it was affected by the war. And in Q2 of 2023, GDP has exceeded the pre-war level. Now, this is an illustration of the idea that the key driver today is the domestic demand, not external demand. All key scripts for or scenarios for the next few quarters depend on the situation inside the country, not outside. In this graph, you can see a blue line, which is the GDP, like in the levels presented in the previous slide, and red and yellow. Red is domestic demand, and yellow is net external demand. Therefore, we can see in aggregate, they generate this blue line. But we have to do this breakdown in order to see what's a driver and what's not, what's an outsider here, and what drags the economy to the bottom. When domestic demand is a key driver, and if this happens asynchronously, if net external demand is in the opposite direction, then this will change the worsening of the external standing. And if I decided not to dive deep into history, but I believe many of you remember the periods like 2010, 2011, when accelerated domestic demand, artificially accelerated, deteriorated the external demand, and it was the reason for financial destabilization. This is the first concern that emerges because of the asynchronous movements of domestic demand and net external demand. Let's disaggregate domestic demand. What are the elements inside of it in the structure of domestic demand? What is a key growth driver? Last year, in late last year, we can see the red bars. This was certainly household consumption. After the beginning of the war, it dropped just like an investment, but in the second half year of 2022, household consumption contributed the most in the beginning of the recovery growth. In 2023, this key role is played by investment, like accumulations of fixed assets. Why this happens? My hypothesis is as follows. Consumption is overheated, and growing consumption further is difficult. In the meantime, this is strongly supported by the growth of real wages, which you can see in the graph. And let's look at the baseline. 2018 is 100. GDP, household consumption, and real wage. How the average wages, which are red, behaved, how GDP behaved, which is blue, and how household consumption behaved, which is brownish. So we can see that despite anything, household consumption continues the trend, and the average real salary growth is naturally the key factor to accelerate consumption. Despite this significant support from the side of salaries, we can see that recovery or growth of consumption are much lower than the growth of wages. But I will repeat, my hypothesis is that this is largely associated with the fact that consumption has been overheated already, and based on the current fundamental equilibrium levels, it is close and exceeds its own equilibrium level. Yes, it exceeds its equilibrium level. However, the investment demand in this graph, this is a blue line, is much bigger. So investment demand dropped in many years, and right now it is at its historical lows for the last few decades. So it is much easier to grow if you have such a low baseline. So investment today can bring in the positive dynamics into the growth. And if we speak about root causes, if we summarize this current situation in consumption and investment, we can say that both of them have a reliance factor, a basement for them to be able to show growth again, was stabilization in the external environment, that exports started recovering, that the sanctions shock was digested, and it slowed down the diving of the economy in the recession environment. And without this keystone, the prospects and prerequisites for growth are much weaker. Another factor which stimulates growth of consumption and fixed assets, and we can say that this is the key factor. This is about softness and excess stimulus. A loose monetary policy plays a more critical role today for future periods, and we're going to get back to it later. And speaking of the gross capital formation, we can see a number of factors which either slow down or accelerate the process. Speaking of the latest trend, I would like to mention an important diagnostics. This unprecedented growth of salaries, which is one of the reasons why I keep saying that consumption has been overheated, and there are little prerequisites for it to continue to grow. The wage growth starts pressing the financial standing of companies. The red line. This curve, a dark red, it is labor costs, real unit labor costs. So this is these are the costs, all expenditures, all costs in the enterprise per $1 of product produced. If it exceeds the threshold, if it exceeds the average value for the last decade, which is the bright red line, we can see that this level of salaries is tremendous for the real sector. The real sector carries an additional financial burden in order to ensure such salaries. If we put these bricks together, then we can see my hypothesis. While wages are artificially expanded, consumption can be supported, but the prospects for maintaining salary growth is very complicated or challenged. And why this happens, as I say, artificially, this happens not because of the administrative simulation, but because of the very structural contraction happening in the labor market. And I believe that right now, inside the reasons of this contraction, migration is factor one. And you recall that businesses say that the shortage of labor is their key challenge. So firms, especially private firms, but not only, realize that they have to compete not only inside Belarus and the labor market, but also with the neighboring countries, and they are ready to go for salary increase, even if this contradicts their financial logic and if it becomes an additional burden for their balances, for their profits and losses. Whether this is going to be sustainable, it's a big question. And now a couple of slides about external demand. This is top two because domestic demand, which is top one, is the protagonist. But what happens in the external environment? This is also one of the basements. If we get back to April or May of 2022, when exports were low, then the positive dynamics in the domestic environment we can't forget. And speaking of, I should make an important disclaimer. The data on the physical volumes of imports and exports are estimates based on various sources. I have to acknowledge that there can be discrepancies. I am confident that the general landscape is well portrayed here and discrepancies are not critical. So exports continue to recover, but in the second half year of last year, the physical volumes of exports recovered quite fast, maybe not always stable, but today we can see that this exports recovery slows down. Right now we are at the level of 2018. But when we look at the peaks of the foreign trade miracle of 2021 days is out of the landscape. We are close to the maximum potential in the current context. And what is important, I've already mentioned it, after a long recovery period, you can see the external foreign trade miracle. These are estimates, as I've said, but they are estimates from May 2022, but I can tell you that this is close to the real situation. What we can see here is the red line. Exports is blue and imports is red. It started recovering in 2022, but imports have caught up with exports. So this was one of the pillars of the 2022 recovery, and this pillar is gone. And this partially explains the previous chart why exports slows down and import grows, not logically, but what is one of the factors. This is the weaker price competitiveness. So blue bars is an indicator or are an indicator. This is a combination of two others presented here. The terms of trade index is red, the blue is price competitiveness index, and the yellowish is a real effective exchange rate index. So this is the index that we can see. The price competitiveness index explains the factors for exports. The blue bars show how easy it is at the current pricing for Belarusian manufacturers to sell their products in other countries. And I referred today to the following. In the second half year of last year, we were at the historical highs. The blue bars were almost unbelievably high. In 2012, we had a similar situation. Now the situation goes down. Trade conditions deteriorate. Forex rate and real exchange rate deteriorate. So the context is not as perfect as it was half a year ago. And this is a heavier chart. It comprises basically two previous ones, and it includes both changes in the price indices and physical indices. And it shows how this deteriorates the external position measured in current US dollars. We can see that the balance of trade deteriorates significantly. The balance of trade in goods, yellow bars, are negative again. However, last year they were positive. The balance of trade in services, red bars, also contract. They are contracting, so we can see a negative impact. We can see an effect of on physical volume from the physical volumes and prices. What are the projections? That is my last slide. As I've said, there are four key questions or issues. If this trend extrapolated in the Belarusian economy in the end of 2023, we will see something close to the formal projection, something like 3.7, 3.8% growth. However, this is not something which is guaranteed. B, the end of the year is not the end of the world. We should look forward, and even if we speak about a short-term forecast, we should realize what's behind and what are the key factors. Why do we have these four key issues? Export recovery. So the first question is, how sustainable is the export recovery? It's dependent on potash fertilizers and petroleum products, largely. Who knows? Maybe we face a situation when new stages of sanctions imposed on Russia, or if changes are in pricing for fertilizers, will break this, and then many of the root causes that I've mentioned before will be ruined. This has been going on for the last year. I mean, this issue is on the agenda for the last year. Next question. What is behind the trend of an accelerated recovery of imports? According to statistics for the last 3 years, we can see quite surprising things. Today, foreign trade statistics is not published and is not available, so it's difficult for us to judge what's behind this trend. Issue 3, or question 3. How stable is the current priority scheme? GDP growth is everything. The risks of inflation and financial destabilization secondary in economic policy. Golovchenko, Prime Minister of Belarus, in 2023 promised the growth, but will it be stable? And the last question, to what extent is the real sector ready and able to sacrifice its financial standing in order to maintain and to grow wages against the backdrop of contraction of the labor market and migration? It's hard for me to find the best metaphor for describing the landscape and the labor market. Will companies be ready to sacrifice their financial standing? And even if so, this will be a built-in barrier to further growth of salaries. This is it from my side. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer your questions after all the presentations are complete. Thank you. Dmitry, thank you very much. And right now we have another block, the last one, which is about the monetary environment and inflation. and Anatoly Kharitonchik is going to dwell on this. Thank you, Olga. My presentation is going to be a summary of the bulletins published on the website of BEROC. Last week, this is the inflation overview, monetary environment overview. So if you need details, please refer to these publications. In short, inflation in Q2 remained low, and a key factor was the total blanket price controls by the government. It was suppressed by the continuously growing, shaping pro-inflationary impact from the domestic demand and the labor market. As Dmitry has already said, GDP was recovering fast in Q2, and according to my estimates, the volume of GDP exceeded its inflationary neutral or equilibrium level in Q2, so we can see positive output gap. And an important factor for shaping this positive output gap and fast economic recovery was super loose monetary policy stimulating monetary and financial conditions. If they are left loose, pro-inflationary pressures in the second half year have prerequisites for strengthening, and we are likely to observe acceleration of inflation. In annual terms, inflation will start accelerating from October, and by the end of the year, we are going to have 5 to 7%. In next year, inflation may rise to 7 to 10%, even if the National Bank gradually returns to a neutral monetary policy. If I speak about inflation, I'm going to use the so-called annualized quarterly inflation. This indicator is the growth in prices per quarter, seasonally adjusted. And to the fourth power, we can see this as an instant price impulse, and to a certain degree of conditionality, this is going to be the inflation in a year if the impact of all the factors will continue as in the report quarter. On the graph, we can see the indicator of annual inflation. This is the growth in prices for the last 12 months. So quarterly inflation, I'm going to be saying quarterly. This is an annualized indicator, was, according to my estimates, 3.7% in Q2 this year. And this is the second minimum quarterly growth in prices since 2017. If we neglect the unique fourth quarter of last year, the core inflation slowed down even more. But in the environment of blanket price controls, the inflation indicator is not longer an indicator of sustainable price pressure. The same conclusion is valid for the median inflation. It is estimated as equal to 0 in Q2. So half of the consumer basket products got more expensive, half of them kept the pricing or got cheaper. And the price increment distribution in the consumer basket is not typical, is unnatural for Belarus. This is the graph on the right-hand side. So the distribution towards cheaper goods and services, the price increment distribution and median inflation are very distorted by price controls. If we look at the divided components of inflation, low price growth was due to low growth in inflation processes in goods, both foods and non-foods, and that services would get more expensive faster, especially non-regulated services. Quarterly inflation in those for 2 quarters in a row, according to my estimate, exceeds 10%. This discrepancy in the prices for goods and services can be explained by two factors. On the one, two pathways. On the one hand, this might say that the economy has pro-inflationary pressure, which accelerates prices for non-regulated services, but slowed down in the segment of goods by blanket strict price controls. Because resolution 713 is about the goods, not services. But on the right hand side, you can see a graph. High price growth for non-regulated services for the in the last quarters is also about the equalization of goods. Last quarter, goods were getting expensive faster than services. So services, non-regulated services, are compensatory. They compensate the prices that grew before prices for goods. This process is over in Q2. So the inflation in non-regulated services can be seen as one of the indicators of sustainable price pressures. We have to monitor, we should keep an eye on that in the future. If we move to the factors that predetermine the inflation dynamics in quarter two, then as said, the key restraining factor was the blanket price controls. You can see it on the left-hand side, the composition of the baseline inflation, of core inflation, and we can see this gray bar showing the strict price controls, which limits the transfer of market factors on prices, and this can build an inflation overhand. I'm going to refer back to this later. Than inflation expectations. According to the National Bank, we can see that the expected inflation slowed down, and now expectations are close to minimum values for the whole period of observations of the National Bank. So inflationary expectations, because the households and businesses adapted to new reality because of the additional pro-inflationary impact was not seen in Q2. The second factor was the exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble. In Q2, the Belarusian ruble strengthened. If we measure this through the real nominal exchange rate and the basket, and also the fact that Belarusian currency got more expensive than the Russian currency, and second, net offer of foreign currency in the domestic market increased. You can see it on the right on the right hand side. This is the foreign exchange market balance, and you can see that the main donors of currency were non-residents and the households. In the first case, this can be explained by various payment arrangements, payment schemes for imports to Russia, or this would be the re-export schemes. In terms of households, this is the complicated operations with foreign currencies in Belarus, and also this might be also explained by outbound tourism, and the net demand for foreign currency from firms and banks is still there. This must be because of the foreign currency arrears of enterprises to be converted into Belarusian rubles. They have to buy rubles. So banks play with that. They buy foreign currency. Companies sell foreign currencies to repay their debts, and the banks buy that. And in second quarter, Ministry of Finance bought foreign currency worth of $307 million, but this statistics is not really published, so the National Bank bought it. And also strengthening of the Belarusian ruble led to neutralization of its undervaluation that happened last year. And in Q3, I estimate Belarusian ruble to be as overvalued in terms of the real exchange rate. What that means, on the one hand, proxy pro-inflationary impact from the exchange rate because of the equalization of prices inside the country and abroad gets lower. It's being neutralized, and we can see this on the left-hand graph. Ratio of prices for foods that are exported to Russia. We can see that this is similar to the levels seen in March last year. On the other hand, overvaluation of the Belarusian ruble will mean deteriorating price supports of Belarusian competitors, of Belarusian companies. Their price competitiveness will drop, and this will affect the net exports in the second half year of this year. And another factor in this second quarter was seen in the economy. Prices for raw materials stagnated. You can see the gray area in the left chart. There was no pressure from the index of global supply chains. Energy commodities did not play a significant role. We can see pressures, but the Belarusian market can be compensated by the strengthening of the Belarusian ruble to the Russian ruble. So these are the factors that have provided neither additional pro-inflationary pressure nor disinflationary pressures, but gradually we can see two key factors shaping the factors of price pressure. This is domestic demand, which has been recovering quite fast, and the labor market situation. Because of the fast recovery of GDP, its volume, according to my estimates, is 0.7% exceeded. It's an inflation neutral level. You can see it on the left-hand side. So this is a positive output gap. The same is about the wage dynamics. Wages kept growing starting from the second half year of last year, and according to my estimates, this must be growing because of the labor market deficit. Therefore, the level of real wages is higher than the inflation neutral value. And what positive output gap means in terms of inflation? Demand in our economy was growing rapidly, and it reached a high level. As Dzmitry showed, in the consumer segment, it exceeded, and according to my estimates, significantly exceeded pre-war values. Therefore, in order to adjust to this growing demand, on the demand side, the producers of goods and services should engage additional labor force and additional capital. And the problem is that in the conditions of the deficit in the labor market, the opportunities from the supply side, I mean, the labor force to adjust to demand is limited. And this requires labor costs to grow. This is what Dzmitry talked about. The same is about capital. In an environment when supply chains got longer, more expensive, a rapid acceleration requires additional costs, and changing production technologies in short-term period is quite challenged. Therefore, adjustment to the demand will increase costs, and this will cause price pressures, which is slowed down by total price, blanket price controls exercised by the government. And what caused this positive output gap? On the right-hand side, you can see that one of the key factors was the implementation of the loose monetary policy of the National Bank, which created the stimulating monetary conditions. On the left-hand side, we can see the monetary conditions, and you can see that they were extremely loose, soft, and they are like that for a year. And in the second quarter, we can see that this is loose monetary conditions because of low interest rates. So the National Bank continues implementing inflation-tolerant monetary policy aimed at supporting economic activity. And loose monetary policy is not about decreasing the reference refinancing rate, but about this awkward approach to regulation of the banking system. On the right-hand side, you can see that the National Bank stopped regulating liquidity in the bank market system, using market tools. So this system operates in the context of a gigantic excess liquidity. Unlike 2019, this liquidity is not withdrawn by the National Bank. Therefore, the interbank interest rate is close to 1% in nominal terms, and this is much lower than its neutral, inflation-neutral equilibrium level in real terms. This means excessive super loose monetary policy of the National Bank. And we can see that the transmission mechanism in Belarus is operational, and the interest rates on loans and deposits are reflected here. The ruble deposits loans reached the historical lows last year, and they continue to be like that for the whole period of observations. In nominal terms, this is much lower than the real values in real representation. The same is about the lending rates. They have a larger lag amid this loose policy, but when they rewrite this in nominal terms, I estimate that these interest rates are much lower than the inflationary neutral values in real terms. So interest rates are shaped by loose monetary conditions, and this is one of the key factors to sustain domestic growth. Where do we see this loose monetary policy, loose monetary conditions from the side of interest rates? We can see this reflecting in a burst lending activity in lending impulse. The volumes of newly issued loans grows much faster than the growth of the nominal GDP. And right now, the credit impulse on the average for the last 4 quarters is higher, significantly higher than in 2017 or 18. And that period was also a recovery period after a long recession of 2015 and 16, and that the high credit impulse is supported by lending in Belarusian rubles, and to a large extent by lending of the private sector. And the growth of active lending brings us to a significant growth in the broad money supply. Broad money supply for the last 4 quarters, on average, seasonally adjusted, grows 4.5% a quarter in real terms. The money supply grows by Belarusian ruble. Money supply grows by a bit more than 4%, and these volumes of money supply is 2 times higher than what we used to have in 2017, when it was a recovery growth after a recession. As I've said, it is clear that the pace of money supply growth exceeds its inflationary neutral values, and in my estimates, the money supply volume in the economy is more than 6% exceeds the inflation neutral value. So we can see a delayed price growth potential. And another factor is the change of the structure of the broad money supply in the current accounts and cash. The current accounts and cash in a year, this gap increased by about 10 percentage points. Certainly, all these figures are seasonally adjusted, and it exceeded 60% in Q2. I'd like to say that the last time this comparable share of cash money and current accounts in the broad money supply could be seen in January 2023. So right now, we sorry of 2003. So this is the highest value for the last 20 years. Therefore, the structure of money supply is more and more fragile to shocks, and if there are any crisis manifestations, the potential negative impacts will expand. If we speak about projections and expectations, what should we expect? I'd rather say that the monetary conditions in terms of interest rates will continue being loose, soft in the second half of this year. I can imagine that the National Bank will not lower the refinancing rate. I'm sure that the National Bank is aware of the pro-inflationary pressures and the growing pro-inflationary risks. At the same time, I understand that this approach to regulating liquidity, the current one, will persist till the end of this year. And if it maintains the interest rate, the interbank interest rate, there will remain low, and the interest rates on deposits will stay close to the historical low values, certainly if there are no any additional significant shocks. At the same time, in the environment of gradually accumulating pro-inflationary pressures and growing risks for inflation, I can assume that in the end of this year or early next year, the National Bank may get back to active regulations of the liquidity in the banking system, and this will mean transition from super loose monetary policy to a neutral monetary policy. This will increase interest rates in the interbank market to 9 to 11%, and then this will increase interest rates for loans and Belarusian ruble deposits. Speaking of the second component of monetary conditions, the exchange rates of the Belarusian ruble, on the left-hand side, we can see that the baseline projection shows that in quarter three, Belarusian ruble will be valued like in Q4. Right now, we can see that the prerequisites are building for the weakening of the Belarusian ruble because of the likely deterioration of the foreign trade in goods and services. The balance of foreign trade seasonally adjusted could be seen in Q2, and if there's a stimulus of domestic demand, if there is overheated Belarusian ruble, if there's high competition in the Russian market, then it is very likely that further deterioration of the foreign balance or foreign trade condition will get worse. However, we should say that the exchange rate is very hard to project. There are lots of risks that can affect the actual dynamics that you can be moving anyway. And in case soft monetary or loose monetary conditions pertain in the second half year this year, and amid this, there will be a continued positive output gap in the labor market. There will be the pro-inflationary pressure. Because of that, inflation will gradually accelerate. So we are likely to observe acceleration of quarterly inflation starting from this quarter. But in annualized terms, annual inflation will start accelerating since October, starting from October. in October itself, it will be about 2.5%. Then in October, annual inflation will abruptly accelerate. Then it will be 5 to 7% at the end of the year. Next year, the price growth, according to the baseline projection, will be 7 to 10% if the National Bank gradually moves from loose monetary policy to neutral monetary policy. At that, we should note that we do not know what is the target of inflation for the National Bank for next year. If the target is 5 to 6%, then the monetary policy should get stricter already today in order to neutralize this accumulated pro-inflationary pressure. Between the moment you make a decision on monetary policy and the maximum effect on the economic activity and inflation in Belarus, this process takes about a year. And I can see an important risk for the monetary environment for inflation. The continued combination of price controls and loose monetary policy. They will lead to the accumulation of an inflationary overhang. And this will mean significant macroeconomic adjustments in the future. And what is an inflationary overhang? This is a delayed, accumulated potential price growth. And the shaping of the inflationary overhang because of the price controls has been acknowledged by the National Bank. They did it nicely. They published a graph on the left. So the National Bank said and depicted that price controls, that resolution 713 of the government slowed down inflation, or price growth, quarterly price growth, not only in Q4 of 2022, but in Q1 and in Q2 of 2023. So, according to my projections were quite close to the projections of the National Bank. So, if we accept this explanation of the government, that by October last year our prices were too high, they were not in equilibrium for various reasons, and stricter price controls and adoption of resolution of 713 adjusted prices and adjusted them to the equilibrium level, then the impact of price controls on inflation, on price growth, had to happen only in Q4 of 2022. However, if this resolution cannot artificially slow down prices, if they can grow naturally as the costs grow, then the impact on quarterly inflation in Q1 and Q2 of this year had not to be seen. The National Bank said it was important, and QPM shows it was there. So we can say that right now there's an inflationary overhang. There's a delayed price increase. So we can interpret this in different ways. All of those interpretations are speculations. According to my estimate, we can say that this price overhang is from 1.5 to 6% based on the performance of the second quarter. This is not critical now, but if we sustain, if the National Bank continues current approaches to monetary policy, if monetary policy is loose, is continuing to be loose, this price delayed price increase, this inflation overhang will continue growing. This is it from my side. Thank you, Anatoly. Thank you so much for your presentation. As far as I can say, in our chat, we do not see any questions. Maybe we have any questions in this conference room. If there are any questions, please let us know. We will pass the microphone to you for the people to hear us in Zoom, and let's see whether we have any questions in the chat. If we do not have any questions, I do not see them in the room. I have one question. May I take the floor? Yes, please, sir. Kamil Wyszynski, Center of Eastern Studies from Poland. I have a question to Dzmitry Kruk. Dima, I suffer from lacking information from Belstat. This is a nightmare. Nothing can be found out there, but still, maybe we should try answering this question deeper. What are the reasons behind this huge input growth? You've said that strange things happening. I agree. Can we explain this only by the price factor of the exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble, or physically the volume of imports grows? And then how come? I cannot see this in Eurostat for European Union to supply so much. I cannot see such a growth in imports in Belarus. Maybe you can help me because I lack this knowledge. Maybe you can help me explaining this situation. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, I cannot really help you in order to provide you true information, only if a hypothesis. First, if we had objective data, there would not be miracles. So probably I'm just complaining. It's not relevant to you, maybe, but quite often we have to look for data and we have to estimate things which must be as data. In this situation, indeed, this is unclear what is behind growing imports. If this is a natural process associated with the recovery inside the economy, together with the inflation demand growing, this is one story. Then this input growth will be sustainable as long as the economic activity continues, and then it slows down, and or if the National Bank or other authorities, financial authorities, slow down economic activity. This is one scenario. Another thing, another story, this figure can have a significant portion of the sanctioned goods that are re-exported to Russia. Whether this is significant or not, I don't know. This will be only our speculations. I don't have data on that. But still, if this is a significant part, then there's another important question. Why we cannot see this in the exports? Maybe there are some schemes showing that this is going to Belarus. Maybe it's not staying in Belarus. And maybe we can see this statistics. Well, this is not critical, statistically speaking, but if this is real imports going to Russia, then again, if this is just a hypothesis, there will be significant growth from China and Turkey. Well, at least this is what we can see in the surveys. We can see imports come from these countries, but we can only give you a few hypotheses, and there is no clear answer because we do not have data available and reasons to answer these questions. Thank you. But there's just another additional question about re-exporting to Russia. What can be these goods? Cars or something else? Including cars. I believe that the range of goods can be quite large. Speaking of the key things that would prove that, I can refer to private informal surveys of large business people. We had some interviews, so I remember that 4 to 5 people recalled this phenomena in absolutely various sectors, as you say, cars, parts for industry, and even consumer goods. So the range can be anything, but these are just words and speculations. I would like to add more about exports to Russia. Right now, it seems that unlike the previous war and previous sanctions, right now we have more import channels to Russia through other countries. So it is easier to see what's going on there. We can look at the statistics of Georgia, Kazakhstan, no, Azerbaijan, no, Uzbekistan. We can clearly see some of the categories of goods increased both in terms of imports and exports in these countries. So right now it's not Belarus in this supply chain, but other countries. And Dmitry is right. This includes Turkey is one of the pioneers here. Thank you. Lev, thank you. Dmitry, there's one more question in the chat from Katya Glod. How was it possible to recover export in terms of sanctions or under sanctions? You may recall we devoted a lot of time to this in our last session. There are three pillars, three factors. Petroleum products. Anatoly I can tell you more about this. There are multiple schemes, but sticking to the Urals price and able to fix the oil rent, and this recovered income from petroleum products. The key question: where these petroleum products go to, Russia or other countries? We don't know because we do not have this information. But I can imagine that it is supplied to some other places, not to Russia. Not the largest part goes somewhere else. So the second pillar is potash fertilizers. They must be going to the same places, destinations, China, India, partially to Brazil, partially through railways, partially through Russian seaports. And the third pillar is the growth of price competitiveness that I illustrated on the graph. In Russia, thanks to this, especially in the second half year of last year, everything would go there. For 10 times I mentioned this in public discussions. I referred to this quote. One business person in August last year told me, this month I'm selling everything, laying on my sofa. I don't have to take any action. My goods go and sell themselves. So that's how he was saying. Thank you very much. We have been going on for more than 1.5 hours. Maybe we have any questions in this conference room. I don't see any questions in the chat anymore. Okay, we are going to pass the microphone to Julian. First of all, I would like to appreciate all of you. I don't know why we have everything in Russian language today. I don't know. And second, I'd like to say that there's a good news that the bank started publishing data on the international reserves. This is a surprise. Something must be going on. Maybe Belstat will open anything because Russia has started publishing some of the data that is not classified. Maybe our guys will do the same. My question is about investment. Dmitry, where inflation, where investment comes from? Thank you for your question. This investment in fixed capital, this is not a financial but real investment, and the key source of financing, I can be wrong, but this is own funds of enterprises plus bank loans. So this is activization of bank loans, but I would say that the driver is rather the administrative stimulus, let's call it this way. This is one of the key backbone lines for recovering investment. This investment spur of new investment cycles were mentioned by Chervakov, Minister of Economy, and these mechanisms and methods have been applied. So this is an uprising in investment, I think largely related, associated with this administrative pressure. But administrative, not directly, but indirectly through various tools and instruments. Sometimes they set targets to enterprises and they have to look for financing. Sometimes this is about providing access to finance. Sometimes these are the actions in private sector of business people found out ways and they agreed to these risks. But what I mentioned in my presentation, we are at such a low baseline that this growth is, well, we cannot even call it a recovery growth. Thank you very much. As I can see, we do not have any more questions in the room. Thank you all who was here, who participated, asked questions. Thank you for your interest paid to this, and we will continue informing you about the Belarusian economy. All the best to you and see you in the future.